Hey, welcome back. Today we're looking at The Winter's Tale, Acts 4 and 5. And as you can see, there's a huge change between Acts 1 through 3 and Acts 4 and 5. As we talked about last time, Acts 1 through 3 are in the winter. They are cold. They are full of jealousy and injustice and hatred, and ultimately end in death. But there is newness of life in the second half, and in Acts 4 and 5, we have new life, we have spring, we have music, and we have love. And all these things make a world of difference in the feeling of the story. But just because we have all these good things and that we're focused on young lovers and we're focused on music and song and dance and celebration doesn't mean that the consequences of the first half go away. And we talked about this as a romance last time. How it's about a story of a family being broken apart and then brought back together. We see a similar structure in Cymbeline and Pericles, these other great books of Shakespeare. But the cost within The Winter's Tale is very high. Leontes doesn't get off easy at the end of this story. He still loses his son. And even though there are reunions and celebrations at the end of this story, they come at great sacrifice. One of my favorite things about these romance plays is the possibility of forgiveness and recovery. Everybody makes mistakes, and some of their mistakes are absolutely outrageous and horrifying, like the mistakes of Leontes, who condemns his wife in a fit of outrage without having any real evidence. An excellent example of how you should always use logic and evidence and proof before you jump to your emotional conclusions. And although sometimes readers get frustrated at some of the characters that get off at the end of these plays, I mean, they deserve worse than this. Think of the characters at the end of Cymbeline, like Posthumus and Iachimo, who make horrible mistakes and do really awful things and ruin a lot of people's lives. And yeah, they definitely deserve punishment, but compare that rather to the revenge plays like Titus Andronicus and Hamlet. Plays that end with horrific violence and destruction because characters do pursue revenge rather than forgiveness and peace. I don't know about you, but I'd rather be in one of the romance plays. Act 4 opens as time steps forward, personified. The character of time, to show that we have moved forward in time. It's been 16 years since Perdita was left in Bohemia. And with this shift in time, we also have the shift in season, the shift in feeling, and the shift in tone of the play overall. In scene 2, we catch up with Polynixes, who is still ruling over Bohemia, and Camillo, who you remember refused to poison Polynixes and instead ran away with him when Leonatus went kinda crazy, is still there. And honestly, he's homesick. He's been away from home for 16 years. And everyone's heard that Leonatus has changed, but at the same time, Polynixes isn't going back there. And Camillo, who's getting older, now feels the desire to return home. But Polynixes says, no, there's no way I'm letting you go back. You've been so useful to me. Don't undo all that. I still need you around here. After all, Polynixes' son, Prince Florizel, whose name reminds us of flowers and spring, has been acting a little fishy lately. He hasn't been spending as much time in the court and instead has been going off and hanging out with shepherds. Polynixes wonders why and he needs Camillo to help him figure it out. In scene 3, we meet a new character whose name is Autolycus, and this character is one of the most musical in all of Shakespeare. He's a con man who's used to work for Prince Florizel, but has been given the boot. He has about 1 million tricks up his sleeve, constantly changing disguise and actually conning the same people over and over and over again. And he's also constantly singing. In this scene, he runs into the clown, who is the son of the shepherd that took in Perdita. And the clown is preparing for the big sheep shearing festival, which is about to happen in scene 4 of this act. Autolycus spins a great con on him and manages to rob him completely of all of his money, and then decides to go visit this sheep shearing festival himself to see how many other people he can con. And so we come to one of the longest scenes in Shakespeare. Act 4, Scene 4, the sheep shearing festival. This is a big extravaganza with lots of song, lots of dance, lots of performance. Not to mention that we have a significantly featured young couple who's deeply in love. Perdita and Prince Florizel. Oh look, the children of these two kings have come together and are reuniting the brokenness of the first half. And this becomes the plot of the second half of the story. But there's still a lot of threats in their way. Specifically, Polixenes takes this time to go visit and figure out what his son is doing, and he comes in disguise with Camillo. And the two of them observe how Prince Florizel is in love with this no-name shepherdess. And although she's really beautiful and obviously very refined and talented for a shepherdess, they're not very excited about this match, especially when Florizel decides that he's going to propose to her without asking permission of his father. In fact, Polixenes, who's in disguise of course, talks to Florizel and says, hey, don't you have a dad you should probably consult before you do a big step like this? And Florizel's like, nah, I can't do that. He wouldn't be happy about it. Of course, Florizel hasn't told the shepherds or Perdita that he's really the prince. He's hinted that he's of a good birth, but he hasn't told them specifically who he is. And just at the moment when he's about to formally engage himself to Perdita, Polixenes removes his disguise and says, no you don't! How dare you go behind my back with this hussy? And basically, at this point, Polixenes disowns Florizel, and also says that Perdita deserves an intense kind of punishment. So Florizel and Perdita are going to have to figure out what to do about that, and it's going to be complicated both by Camillo, Autolycus, and the shepherds. But we'll get to that in just a moment. I want to pause before continuing this scene to point out that there's a big emphasis on art versus nature in this scene. As part of the festival, Perdita is dressed up as royalty, even though she believes she's a shepherdess. So she's really a princess, thinking she's a shepherd, dressed as a princess. Meanwhile, in reverse, Florizel, who is a prince and believes himself to be a prince, is dressed as a shepherd. Their positions are reversed. There's also this funny conversation between Polixenes and Perdita before Perdita realizes who he really is. He decides to sort of, get a feel for what kind of person she is by talking about horticulture. They talk about plants and flowers for a little while, specifically the difference between more natural flowers and more artificially cultivated flowers. Perdita decries artificial flowers, flowers created in a man-made way, while she celebrates natural flowers. Of course, this is kind of ironic on many levels because she is artificially created at this moment to look like a princess, while thinking she's a shepherd. But it's also further ironic in the fact that she is really a princess. It's complicated. All of this in a story that's supposed to be a winter's tale, a fabrication to make us think a certain way about the world. Art and life, what's the relationship? However, we still have our problems to work out. Of course, Florizel and Perdita are completely devastated by this, but Florizel is going to be faithful to Perdita no matter what. Which is, of course, a huge contrast to the way Leontes in the first half was acting towards his wife. Jealousy and rage without any sort of evidence. Florizel is willing to sacrifice his own well-being, his heritage, and his home, and his wealth, and his kingship, all for Perdita. Enter three very interested and helpful parties. Camillo, who's again been trying to come up with a good way to get back home to Sicily, acts like he's going to help Florizel and Perdita out, saying, let me come up with a plan to help get you guys to a nice safe place where you'll be taken care of and where you don't have to worry about all this. And I'll try to resolve your problems back home. He says, if you all will sail back to Sicily, there you can meet old King Leontes, who will welcome Florizel with open arms because of all of the mistakes he's made in the past. And Prince Florizel can pretend like he's being officially sent by Polixenes, and therefore get a nice welcome. However, Camillo has ulterior motives. He's going to actually snitch on them to Polixenes, and then Polixenes will have to follow to pursue them and bring them back. And when he does, Camillo can jump on board and sail on with him, and finally get to see his home again. However, all of this is overheard by Autolycus. Autolycus has already fleeced everybody at the sheep-shearing festival, and when he overhears this, he sees how he can turn it to his own advantage. And he sees lots of ways that this can profit him. He starts by switching clothes with Florizel to help Florizel escape. He then, in his new outfit, runs back into the shepherd and the shepherd's son, the clown, who he's already robbed at least twice. The shepherd, of course, has information on Perdita's origin. He knows that Perdita's not his real daughter, and he has the letter that was left with her. And he's planning on bringing this to Polixenes because he's trying to get out from under the blame of this whole situation. But Autolycus intercepts this message and decides instead to take these two clowns and sell them out to Florizel. Knowledge is power and knowledge is money, and Autolycus is going to make as much money off of this adventure as he can. He says, "If I had a mind to be honest, I see fortune would not suffer me. She drops booties in my mouth. I am courted now with double occasion, gold, and means to do the prince my master good, which, who knows how that may turn back to my advancement." And so Act 4 ends. One more point on Act 4 is the contrast of love. We've seen jealousy and coldness and hatred in the first half. We've seen love horribly broken and gone wrong. Here, with the spring and all the new love, we see love in a very different light. We see the faithfulness of Florizel and Perdita. But we also have love looked at in a couple of other ways as well, such as with the clown who's trying to balance between these two women, Dorcas and Mopsa. They seem to be somewhat competing for his affections, and mostly they're competing for him to buy them nice things. In other words, this is the kind of love that more affects his pocketbook than his heart. What is real love, and what makes it strong? What makes it overcome all of the tragedies and hardships of life? Can love lift you up after disaster? That seems to be a question we're asking towards the end of this play. And so we come full circle and return to Cecilia. In the court, Leontes' lords and courtiers are trying to plead with him to remarry, and therefore produce an heir. He has been without an heir this entire time, but Paulina is there to continue to keep Hermione's memory fresh in his mind, and the weight of his crimes fresh in his heart, so he doesn't forget about them and let go of that. She also reminds him that the oracle said he would not have an heir until what was lost has been found again. Leontes submits to her judgment and says, "Okay, fine, I won't remarry until you choose the wife." And Paulina says, "Okay, well, I'm not going to choose until I have one who's exactly like Hermione in every possible way, because no other woman on earth is worthy of her." And she sort of strong-arms the whole court into agreeing with that. At that moment, a servant comes in and says, "Oh, Prince Florizel from Bohemia is here with his new bride, who's amazing. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's the most gorgeous woman ever." And Paulina takes offense at this because she's just been talking about how Hermione was the most beautiful woman ever and you'll never see her like again. And here's this upstart princess who is apparently getting as much fame among the servants and lords who see her as Hermione once did. But aside from Paulina's reservations, Leontes and the court are happy to welcome Florizel and Perdita into their midst, even though Florizel's story is a little bit sketchy. After all, why isn't he being followed around by a big entourage, and why didn't he sin earlier? And when they ask where Perdita's from, he's like, "Oh, she's a Libyan princess." Yeah. But they're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt until a lord comes in and says, "Oh, by the way, the Polixenes is here from Bohemia, and he's really angry because his son ran away with some no-good shepherdess." Oh no, we're exposed! It's Camillo's fault! Leontes realizes that Florizel has betrayed his father for the sake of this young girl. But he also sees how beautiful Perdita is, and she sparks something inside of him because she reminds him of Hermione, to Paulina's annoyance. But it's enough that he says that he will go and put in a good word, as best he can, in this reunion between Polixenes and Leontes. And of course this strikes Leontes deep, because when he first sees the two of them, they look like the two great loves that he's lost. Florizel, who looks just like his friend Polixenes when he was a boy, and Perdita, who looks just like Hermione when she was young. His lost wife and his lost best friend. The two things that he sacrificed to his jealousy and hatred. And his heart, which has been softened over the years through Paulina's persistence, is now ready to do what he can to help these two. We skip the big reunion scene and revelation scene and instead get a little aside where Autolycus runs into a couple of gentlemen who tell him everything that went down. Everyone was reunited and everything was exposed, and so they discovered that Perdita was not some random shepherdess, she's actually a princess, and actually the daughter of Leontes. This is his lost heir. Oh! And Leontes and Polixenes are reunited, and Florizel and Perdita are able to get married, and everything looks great. And Autolycus did not see this coming. Not only that, but the shepherd and the clown, the shepherd's son, who took care of Perdita all these years, have been elevated to the status of gentlemen. And Autolycus, who conned them several times and was going to use them to step up the social ladder with Florizel, now realizes that he's actually lifted them above himself. And although they're both still complete buffoons, he has to plead with them to put in a kind word with Florizel. Thanks, Autolycus, for fixing everything for us, but you also kind of got your comeuppance a little bit. But the play's not over yet, and in this scene we have Paulina, who is taking the whole reunited crew to see a work of art representing Hermione. And it's something that Perdita wants to see. She wants to see what her mother looked like. And Paulina has created this statue to commemorate and remember Hermione. It's not a statue of Hermione as she was in her youth, but what she would have looked like had she aged through these 16 years. And as Paulina draws back the curtain, they're all struck silent by her beauty. And again, as I mentioned before, there's the hand motif. Perdita wishes to reach up and touch the hand of her mother's statue. But Paulina forbids them, saying that the paint is still wet, you can't touch her. Leontes, however, is so moved he insists that he be given the opportunity to kiss the statue. Finally, Paulina says, "Either forbear, quit presently the chapel, or resolve you for more amazement. If you can behold it, I'll make the statue move indeed, descend and take you by the hand. But then you'll think, which I protest against, I am assisted by wicked powers." And so she says the statue's going to move down and reach out and actually clasp your hand. Again, that clasping of hands, the reuniting kind of image, the image of unity and camaraderie and holding together. Something that was completely destroyed and torn apart at the beginning is now brought back together. And at this point, Hermione, who is not a statue at all, but the true Hermione, steps down from the platform and is reunited with her husband and her daughter after all of this. And so we have restoration and unity returned, but it's not without loss. Hermione is aged. And although Perdita and Florizel are united now with their families again, as well as with each other, there's still the lost son. And Leontes calls for Camillo and Paulina to marry, but we remember Paulina's lost husband. The loss and grief don't go away, and the years wasted don't go away. But there's still hope of a happy ending, even in A Winter's Tale of Sorrow. Shakespeare's romances are really interesting because of this imagery of restoration. If you're frustrated with Leontes being forgiven, you can always go back and read Titus Andronicus, or one of the revenge plays, and see what happens when everybody gets what they deserve. I think the romances can be awfully refreshing sometimes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Especially when Florizel decides that he's going to... Get a muffler.
Yeah, it's cloudy. So good, Arthur.